Good evening, everybody. I would like to thank you all for inviting me up here. I appreciate the opportunity. It's always an honor to be a part of my own sobriety and to be able to share my experience, strength, and hope. And hopefully I'll be of service to somebody here. I'd like to thank Kent and Debbie for opening their home to me and allowing me a place to hang out today and spend the night. I'd also like to thank Kerry. He was in constant communication with me of letting me know what was going on, everything. So it was really wonderful. And it's also nice. Doesn't matter where I travel anymore. It's almost, I always see at least one or two people that I know, and it's nice to see a couple familiar faces out here. The only way I know how to do this is the way my sponsor taught me. And he said, just tell them how it was, what happened, and where my life is today because of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I want everyone to understand from the beginning, and I hope you understand this by the time I'm through. Everything good in my life today is because of Alcoholics Anonymous. Everything I have, the person I am right now, is because of Alcoholics Anonymous. I have a sobriety date, August 27th, 1996. I have a sponsor. My sponsor has a sponsor. I sponsor other men, and I have a home group. And if any of you ever are in Los Angeles on a Wednesday night, please stop by the Pacific Group. We will give you a warm welcome. I was born and raised in Southwest Missouri on an Angus beef farm in the absolutely middle of nowhere, and I hated every minute of my childhood. I was an only child. Now, before most of you are already jumping to the conclusion that I was spoiled, I didn't have to share any hand-me-downs. I didn't have to share anything with my brothers and sisters. I quit arguing about that a long time ago because you're probably right in some cases, but I also want to bring the flip side to it. If the chores were not done, something got broken around the house, I also did not have a brother or sister to blame it on. So there are pros and cons. Growing up on that farm, I 100% idolized my father. Everything I did for my father to tell me he was proud of me, to give me a pat on the back, and to tell me that he loved me. That is just not who my dad was. My dad was the type of man that it was real simple. You did things one way, the way he told you to do it, and that was it. If I brought a B home from school, he wanted to know why it wasn't an A. If I did bring an A home from school, that's the reason you go to school, so you don't need a pat on the back. Alcoholism runs pretty rampant in my family. That is not necessarily the reason I am an alcoholic. It's just the way I was raised. Neither one of my grandfathers ever saw the age of 60 because of this disease, and my uncle died at the age of 42. I took my first drink when I was 9. The reason I did that was real simple. After first and second grade, I already learned real quick that I did not know how to fit in. I did not know how to socialize with kids at recess. I already knew that everybody in that classroom was making fun of me. They were making fun of my boots because they was old and worn. They was making fun of my jeans because they had rips in them. Now, I will admit, in today's world, I would fit in perfectly because people buy jeans that already have pre-rips in them. Never quite grasped that. But anyway, when I was growing up, you got made fun of when your jeans had holes in them. And every time I walked in that classroom, I walked in there full of fear of what you were saying about me behind my back, what you were thinking about me, and how I was never going to be part of the group in there. And it was a Sunday afternoon, I don't know, somewhere in the middle of the summer. I watched my grandfather, I watched my uncle, and I watched my dad drinking. And that day it dawned on me and realized that every time they drink, their smiles get a little bit bigger. And after 3 or 4, their laughs get a little bit louder. And by the time the afternoon's over, they're sitting there having a great time. They were listening to a Cardinals game. If the Cardinals won, then it was even a better afternoon. So that afternoon, I decided I was going to find out what was so important about those cans. And when they tell me to take the old cans back and bring the new ones, if there's any slosh left in them, I swallowed it. I took a sip out of each one of the ones, bring it back to them. And by the time that afternoon was over, I got a little buzzy feeling going on. But what I learned was this. My smile got a little bit bigger. I walked a little bit faster, and I felt different. And that's what I had been looking for, was to feel different than who I was. And I chased that for the next 25 years. Now, my drinking didn't take off when I was 9, but anytime I could get a can, I could sneak one, I could steal one. That's what I did. If any of you know anything about small towns, sports kind of rule and dictate everything that goes on. I'm going to say that I was better than average, because when I turned 12, they moved me up and I started playing ball with 14-year-olds. Well, their drinking had escalated a little bit farther than mine had, but it did not take me long to play catch up. I was started just stealing from my grandpa, my uncles, my dad, so I could fit in, so I could have some beer with those guys. And my drinking escalated. And on Monday mornings, people would talk about the stupid things I did. I knew they was making fun of me, but I didn't care. I was getting attention, and that's what I was craving. When I was 16 years old, there was 5 carloads of us coming back from a float trip. The lead car had a wreck, and one of the girls was killed. Her parents and mine had known each other before Joe and I was even born, and they asked me to be one of the pallbearers. The morning of the funeral, I showed up drunk. I stumbled carrying the casket, and I made a real fool out of myself. And that was the first time I had people tell me, maybe I need to slow down on my drinking. Maybe I need to do things differently. And my attitude to them was real simple. I'm taking care of things the way I need to take care of them, and just leave me alone. My junior year, that little small town probably had one of the best ball teams they'd had in probably 20 years. We ended up making it to the state. We lost in the quarterfinals, but that day I probably played one of the best games I'd ever played in my entire life. And I just knew, even though we lost, my dad was going to be proud of me. I did not get 3 steps in the door that evening, and he started telling me what I did wrong in the second half. If I'd have passed here, if I'd have shot there, maybe we'd have won. Maybe we'd have been playing for the state championship. And I learned right there that night, it really did not matter what I did. My dad was never going to be proud of me. My senior year, I started throwing keggers on the backside of the farm down by the river. I did not care how much trouble I got into, because every Friday afternoon, people were coming to me saying, Brent, which gate do we go through? Do we go through this one? Do we go through that one? When can we come down? When can the party start? And I liked that, because everybody was coming to me to have that fun. When I graduated high school, pretty much figured I'd be like most people in that little hometown. You end up marrying your high school sweetheart. You start a family, you get a job, you get your own place, and a lot of people just live their entire life there. Well, my dad had other plans. He wanted me to go to college. Now, I hated school every minute I was in high school, and the last thing I wanted to do was go to any more. And that entire summer, while my buddies are getting their own place, I'm stuck out there on the farm. When fall came, loaded up my car, I headed off to school, and I will tell each and every one of you in here, on day 3, I joined a fraternity, and my alcohol absolutely exploded. This was back in 1980. There really was no rules and ramifications of young people drinking. I was drinking every single day, 7 days a week. And there was not one person in my life tell me I needed to slow down on my drinking. Matter of fact, everybody was telling me I needed to drink more, and I had found my people. And that's exactly what I started doing. But it was that same scenario with my father. When I brought that B or C home, he wanted to know why it wasn't an A. If I did bring an A home by chance, he said, that's the reason I sent you there. My sophomore year, things started happening. I started losing friends. People didn't want to hang out with me. I got banned from other fraternities because I was causing problems and causing fights. Drinking wasn't quite as much fun that year as it was before. My junior year, I maybe got probably the greatest job anybody on a college campus could ever have. I became the Anheuser-Busch rep for the district in that town. And all those fraternities that had banned me the year before, they all welcomed me back in. They said, sure, Brent, come on back in. Hand us out some T-shirts. Put the big Bush blow-up can in the yard. I knew they didn't like me any more than they did the year before, but they liked what I could give them. But my drinking was not working anymore. My junior year, I could be in a room just like this, and I would be all alone. I could not drink enough to get the voices in my head to quiet down. Somehow I got through my senior year. I graduated. I got my degree. I got a job. I've got my own place. I'm living my life, and I am a miserable human being. Couple of years after I got out and I had my own place, my mom gave me a call, said that my dad was having some issues. Is there any way I can come home and help out on the farm? I made arrangements at work to take a week off, got home on a Sunday afternoon. I woke up Monday morning. He had a list of chores written down that he needed done. One of the first chores on there was he needed a section of the barn painted. So I grabbed my beer. I headed out to the barn. He had bought all this paint. It was lined up against the wall. I thought, well, this is absolutely ridiculous. I can use about half that paint, get the section done, save him some money, and we'll get the week started off on the right foot. So when he came out later that afternoon, he did not tell me I did a good job. He did not tell me I did a bad job. He just asked me why I didn't use all the paint. I said I didn't need to, got the job done. I saved you some money. He said if I wanted to save the money, I wouldn't have bought it to start with. You might say 25 years of me trying to get that man's approval. Everything come to a head that day. My father and I proceeded to get into a heated argument, and I murdered him that afternoon. I will never know what I did to my mother. That lady stood beside me from day one, second one. And if any of you know anything about a small town gossip, and the things they talked about her was unmerciful. 3 days later, she bailed me out, and my drinking took a turn that I did not know it knew how. I drank in the morning, I drank in the afternoon, I drank at night. I would pass out, wake up at 2 o'clock in the morning, and I would drink more. And that's what I proceeded to do for the next 10 months till I went to court. I was convicted of second-degree murder, armed criminal action, and given 2 life sentences. I went to prison October 3rd, 1987. It took me exactly 13 days to learn how to steal the ingredients out of the kitchen and start making homemade wine. And that's what I proceeded to do for the next 4 years. Now, my mother and my grandmother drove 2.5 hours every single Thursday to come visit me. And when I had that hooch in me and I had my voices in my head quiet, when they would walk into the visiting room, I gave them the biggest hug. I told them how much I loved them. I thanked them for coming up to see me. And I thanked them for bringing that little bag of quarters so I could get a sandwich out of the vending machine. Then on January the 1st, 1992, after a hard night of drinking that hooch, I woke up my cell floor in my own blood, my own puke. The hooch I was cooking was literally burning my stomach lining out. I still refused to admit that I was an alcoholic. I still refused to admit that I had a problem, but I decided that I would just quit drinking. And the reason I shared this next part with you is because I think the next 4 years of being a dry drunk might have been the most miserable part of my life. And I know I was extremely mean to the people who still supported me, because when my mother and my grandmother would walk into the visiting room, my attitude to them was this: visiting room opened 19 minutes ago. Where have you been? I've been waiting. I know I didn't hug them anymore. I'm sure I didn't thank them very much. There was probably days they left. I did not tell them I loved them, but I complained every week that there wasn't more quarters in that bag so I could get 2 sandwiches out of the vending machine. And I had a job in there. I was working out, playing ball, had a couple of guys that I hung out with, and they'd been on me for over 2 years telling me that I was an alcoholic and I needed to do something with my life. And I've been telling them for 2 years that I haven't had anything to drink. People's been telling me I was an alcoholic all my life. And I'm sick and tired of you two getting on my case. But the problem was this: at this point in time in my life, I had nothing left. I had no morals. I had no value. I did not want to go to sleep at night because I didn't want to dream. And I did not want to wake up in the morning because I didn't want to live. And I said, what have I got to do to get you two off my back? And they said, you go to an AA meeting, we'll leave you alone. I said, I truly go to one meeting. You two will never say another word to me about this. And they said, yes. So I signed up. It took a couple of weeks to get on the call out. And that Sunday afternoon, they called AA on the intercom. I went to that room and I sat in the back left-hand corner. I stared at the floor. I absolutely did not hold anybody's hand. I did not participate in their readings. I did not introduce myself. I paid attention to no one, and I stared at the floor wondering when the 60 minutes was going to be up. And when it was done, I'm sure I pushed 2 chairs out of the way, probably tripped over one, headed back to my cell. And the only thing I could think about was, are these 2 guys going to leave me alone? And you know what they did? They did not say a word to me on Monday or Tuesday or Wednesday or all week long. And the only thing I can explain to anyone who will listen to me for the rest of my life is something happened to me that night that I didn't know. Because the following Sunday when they called AA, I went back to that room. And I sat in that same chair and I stared at the floor and I talked to myself saying, why am I back here? And I proceeded to do that for 3 months. And finally, one night I was sitting in that room and I actually listened to what the men were talking about. And they were talking about me. They were talking about how alcohol worked, how they had fun, how they had some good times, and then it quit working. They talked about how they never really felt like they fit in. They didn't have the right car. They never had the right girlfriend. Their parents never lived in the right neighborhood. They talked about how they walked around in fear of what other people thought about them. And that night I grabbed a big book off that table and I took it back to my cell. I'd read a few pages and I thought, well, this stuff isn't no big deal. And then I read a few more pages that started talking about me and I'd fold that book up and I'd throw it on my bunk and it'd lay there for 2 or 3 days. And that's how I cycled through Alcoholics Anonymous for nearly 10 months. And then we had 3 men who would come into the prison so we could have this meeting, which first off, I thought those 3 men was crazy. Why would anyone in the free world devote their time to come into prison to carry a message to us? But these 3 men informed us that we was going to have the meetings just like they are on the street. We made coffee, we had commitments, we had people who folded the chairs up, we had people who wiped the tables down, we had people who cleaned the coffee pot, and I just thought all this was way too much. But at this point in time, they said that they were going to put on what they called a big book workshop. It was going to last 15 weeks. They'd only take 20 of us into it. It was going to be on a Wednesday night. We had to sign a little contract to agree we wouldn't be on a visit. We wouldn't be out playing ball. We wouldn't do anything else besides show up there. And if you did, you could get written up, whatever might happen. So I said, I have nothing else to lose. So I signed up for it. Walked into that first night and they said, does everybody have a big book? And the ones who didn't, they gave them one. Then they handed out papers. And then I looked at these papers and it had questions and then I was supposed to answer them. And I thought, well, I have literally lost my mind. I'm in prison with 2 life sentences. I hated school when I was in it. Now I've signed up for a class and they're giving me homework. But those 15 weeks changed my life. For the first time at the age of 34, I admitted I was an alcoholic. For the first time, I quit blaming the judge, the sheriff, the courts, and the prosecutor for sending me to prison. I started holding myself responsible and holding myself accountable and taking responsibility for the things I'd done in my life. And more importantly, during those 15 weeks, I also started realizing that my father was a good man. He loved me the only way he knew how. It just wasn't what I needed. When those 15 weeks was over, I asked one of those men if he would sponsor me. And I learned once again, I think you all was crazier than I was because every other Sunday he would come in an hour early to walk me through the steps. And I got through steps 1, 2, and 3. I did an inventory. I read it to him, cleaned a lot of stuff off my plate, did 5, 6, and 7. Then we got to the amends step. And he told me to buy a pack of 3x5 cards out of the canteen. He knew they sold them. He said, you start writing down everybody you owe an amends to, how you played your part in it, how you harmed them. And he said, we're going to start going through these. So I did all that. And then it dawned on me, make amends, you got to see somebody face to face. And I'm like, well, when I meet with him tonight, I'm going to tell him. I said, Harold, I said, we're done. And he looked at me and he said, and how did you come up with that conclusion? I said, well, I'm in prison. They're not letting the front doors open. I can't go out and make an amends to anybody. So we're pretty much done till I walk out the front door. And he told me, he goes, I can understand your philosophy there, but that's a wrong answer. I said, well, then you explain to me how I make amends while I'm sitting in prison. And he told me, no, why don't you tell me about the visit you explained to me about you had with your grandmother about 3 weeks earlier. And what I told him was this. I said, I walked into the visiting room and my grandmother said, it's so good to see my grandson again. And I said, Grandma, you see me every Thursday. What are you talking about? And she said, no, my grandson has light behind his eyes again. And it talks about in the big book how others will see changes in us before we ever see them in ourselves. And she saw something happening to me that I didn't know was going on. And I'm so grateful I was given that opportunity to make amends to my grandmother because she passed away less than 5 months later. Now, I don't know if I can ever have made enough amends to my mother for all she endured and all she did to support me and love me. But I tried. She was dealing with cancer and it came out of remission for the third time. And she told me on a visit that she didn't think she could go through this anymore. And my mom passed away long before I ever got out of prison. But she had done something for me that I didn't realize. So I need to backtrack here just a little bit. When I went to prison, I tried to drag a woman and 2 girls in there with me. I'll be honest with you. If I could have brought the dog in that cell with me, I'd have brought anybody in that cell with me to keep me from being so lonely. But that lady lasted about 18 months and she said she couldn't do this anymore and had to move forward. And I'll be real honest, I give her a lot of credit because I was selfish SOB. I probably wouldn't have lasted 18 days. But my mom had been in contact with this woman that I didn't know. And I got a letter one night and it had her name up in the return address corner. And being the alcoholic that I am, I immediately jumped to conclusions. I said, oh, Lord, the day has come. She's going to tell me how I ruined her life, everything I did, how I destroyed everything. She's going to lay it all out. So I came up with 4,327 scenarios of what was in that letter. And it laid there on my desk for 3 days. And after I drove myself nearly crazy, I opened it up and it was real plain and real simple. She said, here's my phone number. Will you please give me a call? Well, I knew I couldn't wait 3 more days to do that. So I got in line as soon as they opened the doors. I went down and gave her a call. She said, am I still on your visiting list? I said, yes. And she said, I'd like to come visit you. And I said, why? And she said, I've been talking to your mom. She said, you've been making some changes in your life and I'd like to come see you. So about 3 weeks later, she came to visit me. And for the first time in my life, I carried on a conversation with a woman without any ulterior motives. Didn't have to worry about what restaurant she wanted to go to, and I didn't even like the food. Didn't have to worry about what stupid movie she wanted to see, and I could care less about it. State of Missouri does not have conjugal visits, so sex was off the table. So we just sat there and talked. And I actually got to know someone for the first time in my life. And for whatever reason, you'd have to ask her or my higher power, who I choose to call God. She wanted to wait on me. We got married in the visiting room of prison and she waited on me till I got out. I became a husband. I became a father. I became a friend. Now, even with 2 life sentences in the state of Missouri, you do get to go see the pro board sometimes. So I went up to that first time and I was arrogant. I thought, well, I've admitted I was an alcoholic. I've started to make amends. I've got my family back. The state's going to see what a changed man I am. They're going to give me a second chance at life. So I went up for that parole hearing. It lasted 6 minutes and they said, Mr. Huff, we will see you in 5 years. And I walked out of that room and I cussed God. I cussed AA. I got on the phone that night and I told Debbie file for divorce as the stupidest thing she could ever done. I am never going home. Move on with your life and I will move on with mine in here. And I whined and I cried for 3 straight nights on the phone. And during that 3rd night, she cut me off point blank and she said, are you done? I'd heard that voice before, so I knew my answer better be the right one. I said, I can be. And she said, well, good. I'm not going anywhere. The girls aren't going anywhere. And we're going to get through this. And just in case anybody in this room didn't figure it out, she was in Al-Anon and she just called it the way it was. That night, I made a change in my life. I set the alarm 15 minutes early before 6 a.m. count. And I got up 15 minutes early every single morning for the next 5 years. And I read out the daily reflections. I read out the big book and I said a prayer. And I got through those 5 years. And I went up for parole that second time. Lasted about 13 minutes. And they said, Mr. Huff, we'll see you in 2 more years. And my pity party lasted about one day because I knew the conversation that was coming. And I changed my life one more time. I set my alarm 30 minutes early. I read out the daily reflections. I read out the big book, whatever month it was. I read that step and I said my prayers. And during those 2 years, I started working with other inmates in prison, trying to help them the best I knew how. I went up to the third hearing, lasted 57 minutes. It took them 73 days to give me an answer. And they said, Mr. Huff, we'll see you in 2 more years. And for the first time, I was good with that answer. Because if I got out when I wanted to, I did not have the foundation of this program. I had not truly worked the steps thoroughly. I knew nothing about the traditions, and I'd have walked out that front door and I'd have crashed and burned and probably died if I got out when I wanted to. And during those following 2 years, I got up and every morning before I left that cell, outside of doing my routine, I worked steps 1, 2, 3, 6, 7, 11 before I walked out of that cell. And when I'd brush my teeth in the morning, I liked the man looking back at me in the other mirror. And I found a freedom living in a 7-foot by 9-foot maximum security cell that I had never experienced living on the street. And I got through those next 2 years. I went up for parole. I was granted an out date. I walked out of prison October 3rd, 2008, 21 years to the day. And there's not one thing I did to deserve that or get those gates to open. Because in the state of Missouri, when I was sentenced, I should have done 15 years on each. I should have done 30 years. I got out in 21. My higher power and the programs of Alcoholics Anonymous did that. Now, I will tell you all this, though. You go to prison in 1987 and you come out in 2008, the world had changed and I didn't fit in anymore. First off, you had these things, didn't know what they were. You had something called the internet. You had Google. You had Siri. I didn't know about any of it. But let me tell you about the first 30 days I got out of prison. I got home on a Friday afternoon. Saturday morning, 2 men knocked on my door and I opened the door. And I will tell you, the first thing I crossed my mind was these 2 guys are here to take me back to prison. Then I realized they wasn't dressed that way. And I said, yes. And they said, are you Brent? I said, I am. Said, Harold L. told us to take you to a meeting. I went to my first AA meeting less than 24 hours out of prison. Sunday afternoon, my wife told me I need to go downstairs in the basement and I need to go through a couple boxes. I thought they were stuff of my mom's, my grandmother. I said, well, I am not ready for that. It's going to take me a while. She said, it's not their stuff, but you need to go through them boxes. So I went downstairs and there was these 2 big boxes down there. And inside those boxes, they had gifts. And I started picking them up and reading them. And it said, Merry Christmas, Dad, 2004. Happy birthday, Dad, 1999. Happy Father's Day, 2001. The reason I share this with you is here. There was not one gift in those boxes for 1996 when I went to my first AA meeting. And when that dawned on me, I realized just how powerful this program is and the miracles that can happen. And then Monday morning came, a man gave me a call, invited me over to his house for dinner. And I realized real quick that all of you in the free world truly was crazier than I was. He cooked me a steak dinner. We went to an AA meeting. But what made him crazy was this. He had a 6-month-old son. I said, why would you invite someone like me into your home who's been out of prison for 3 days for murder with your 6-month-old son sitting here? He said, because those 3 men that have been bringing the message into you for the last 12 years, they told me you have done everything they've asked you to do. And I'm just giving back what was so freely given to me. And I learned what fellowship was truly about this program. I learned what this program truly meant. Now, one of those 3 men, this is back when the Los Angeles Rams was in St. Louis. And, they left L.A., they went to St. Louis. Now they're back out here in L.A., but they was in St. Louis at this point in time. And for whatever reason, for a kid growing up in Missouri, I always was in love with the Miami Dolphins. I fell in love with them with the zonk and kick and greasy eras, and I fell in love with Marino. Make a long story short, Miami was playing the Rams in St. Louis this year, and one of those 3 men bought 4 tickets, and he gave them to me. He said, here's your gift for getting out. He said, you can take whoever you want. So I took my sponsor, Harold. I took a guy named Bob, and I took a guy named Gary. We'd done time together. We got up, we had breakfast. We went to the Lindell Club to an AA meeting. We went to the game. We're sitting there having the time of our lives. I am just like, it's just like I'm there and I'm not there. And at halftime, this lady sat behind us and she says, you guys are having an incredible time, but none of you are drinking. And Harold said, well, that's true. Is that a problem with you? And she said, oh, Lord, no. She goes, if you all were drinking, she goes, you might end up in jail before this day was over. Little did she know, Gary had done 20 years, Bob had done 16, I did 21, and the three of us had done 57 years in maximum security prison. We still laugh about that today. Then Harold told me, he goes, if you're ever asked to share your story, you just say yes unless you have another commitment. I said, Harold, no one's ever going to ask me to share my story, so we'll never worry about that. And he said, I thought you would think of that, so I've already set it up. You're sharing your story. I said, oh, Lord. 28 days out of prison, I share my story in the basement of a church. I am in a complete sweat, nervous wreck, knowing every one of you is going to hear what I've done, and walked out the back of that church. Half of you, this was Halloween night, half of you was in costumes. And I don't know if that helped or hurt me, but I learned something that night. When I got done, every single person in the basement of that church came up and shook my hand or gave me a hug. And you all taught me what real friendship's about, not the guys that I threw my family away with so I could go out and do my dirt. Now, believe it or not, nobody would hire me. I couldn't get a job. Every week, my PO was going, do you have a job? Every week, I told her no, and I had to show her who I'd applied to. And when I tell you nobody would hire me, this is on record in her office. I got turned down 434 times. Quick Trip wouldn't hire me. McDonald's wouldn't hire me. Jack in the Box wouldn't hire me. Walmart wouldn't. There is nobody that would hire me. And I'm sitting here whining and I am complaining. And my sponsor said, did you ever stop to think maybe you're not supposed to have a job yet? And I looked at him and I said, no, that's never crossed my mind because my PO asked me every week and I got to help pay bills around the house. So why would that ever cross my mind? And he said, well, maybe you're just supposed to get used to your family and let them get used to you, and things will happen when they're supposed to. And of course, I kept my mouth shut, but the committee up here is going, damn sponsors. Then about 6 months later, I shared my story, and a gentleman came up to me when the meeting was over, and he said, do you really need a job? I said, yes, I do. He handed me his card. I went to see him the next morning, and he said, hired me right there on the spot. AA doing for me what I could not do for myself. So I ended up getting that job. I ended up getting hurt. I couldn't do the job much anymore. It was right around Thanksgiving. I was rehabbing, having dinner, and we went to an AA meeting. One of the men came up and he said, hey, he goes, how's things going? I explained to him. He wrote a man's name down. He said, give him a call when Thanksgiving's over. I gave the man a call. He hired me. I started working at a car dealership as a porter. I became a salesman. I became the #1 salesman the last 3 years. I was a finance manager, the sales manager, and I ended up being the general sales manager of our Chrysler Dodge Jeep store. There is no way that anybody like me should be given that type of responsibility. I had a security code to unlock it in the morning, to lock it up at night. I had access to keys to 300 new cars and keys to 200 used cars. And the only reason I was ever given that responsibility and given that job is because of every one of you in this room. You told me to come to these rooms, get in the middle, stay in the middle. You said, get a commitment, get busy, and get active. You said, work hard, work smart, work honest, and miracles will happen when they're supposed to. And that's what I did. Now, I don't want anyone, especially if you're new, to come in here and think that if you walk in these rooms, your life is going to be perfect, because it's not. Life is life, and we all deal with it on life's terms. We just have the tools to deal with it in here, and we don't have to be alone. That woman who came back into my life ended up being in a horrific accident. She spent 9 months in ICU. COVID hit and I couldn't get in to visit her. And I finally raised enough crap one night that they put a gown on me and said I had 5 minutes. I walked into the room and she said, "I will not die in this room alone. Please take me home." And I made a decision that night to take her home. I signed a stack of papers against the hospital's will. I told the girls I was bringing their mom home. They ended up taking off work. We all moved back into the house together, and we were all together the last 19 days before she passed away. And you all showed up only like you all know how. You showed up at the visiting with food, with water, with coffee. You surrounded me with love, and you gave me space when I needed it. And my two brother-in-law said, "Who are all these people?" I said, "That's my other family. That's my AA family." They didn't understand, but I did. Now, I'll be real honest. I thought that I would probably live in St. Louis, Missouri, work at that car dealership till I was probably 68, 70 years old. And I'd been really happy with my life. But when I stay out of the way, God has another plan. I was supposed to speak in Dallas, Texas in August of 2020. COVID hit, shut everything down. Stu called and said, "Can you speak in August of 2022? Things was opening up." I said, yes. So I went down there to speak. They had a mix up and they had to move the conference back 2 weeks. So Stu wasn't even there when I got down there. So I had one of his sponsees drop me off at the hotel and just left. I'm standing in the lobby. Deer in the headline looks. I know nobody in Dallas, Texas. And I said, "What am I doing?" This lady must have seen that I was lost. She came up to me. She asked who I was. I explained what was going on. She goes, "I heard that Stu was gone." She goes, "Won't you come to dinner with me? I got a couple of the other speakers." She goes, "You can hang out. We'll get to know everybody." Well, I learned there at dinner that there was another speaker there that literally was not supposed to be there then. She was a late fill-in in the last 12 days because a woman had surgery and couldn't fly. We ended up hitting it off that night. Her best friend says we were sparking. I'll be real honest. I hadn't been on a date in 37 years and I have no idea what I was doing. But when the weekend was over, I heard her story. She heard mine and we were still talking. We ended up dating long distance for a little over a year. Came to the conclusion, what are we going to do? And here's the AA world a little bit smaller. Her sponsor in Los Angeles, California, my sponsor in St. Louis, Missouri, had known each other for over a decade. They'd been at conferences together, workshops together. They knew everything that was going on. I couldn't really ask Yvonne to move to St. Louis. She'd just made partner in a law firm. I work in the car business. Let's face it, it's not life-threatening. So I put my house up for sale. 19 hours later, I had 4 offers. I closed in 18 days. I gave 30-day notice at the dealership. Pretty much everyone in my life in the state of Missouri thought I had truly lost my mind moving to California and giving up everything that I knew and had in Missouri. And for the first time in my life, remember that little kid I told you about who walked around in fear of what you all thought about me? I didn't care because I knew this is what I was supposed to do. It felt right in my heart. And I packed up and I moved to California. I had no job opportunity. I had no idea what I was going to do. But things have turned out well because 2 months after I was out there, I ended up having lunch with the president and CEO of the Midnight Mission. He hired me on the spot. I've been working there ever since. My sponsor told me a long time ago, you need to always do 2 things. Work with a newcomer and go somewhere once a week you never want to end up. I've still got a couple of sponsees in St. Louis. I've picked up a handful of sponsees since I've been in California, and I walk into the heart of Skid Row 5 days a week, and I can tell everyone here I do not want to end up there. That woman I moved out here for, a lot of people said, how did things work out? Well, on her 30th AA birthday, I got down on my knee and asked her to marry me in front of 183 AAs, and she said yes. We got married this past October the 18th. I have a life today. I have a life today that is beyond words. I have a life today that is blessed. I have a life today strictly because of Alcoholics Anonymous. Everything in my life good is because of AA. I know I'm out of time, so let me sum this up. If I will just stay in the passenger seat of the car and I let my higher power drive, we get down the road at 55 miles an hour in between the white lines, and we get down there when we're supposed to. There's a problem with that. I'm an alcoholic. I like to be in charge, and I'll grab the steering wheel and I'll put my foot on the gas and we start running 80 miles an hour down the road. And with me driving, the car starts veering off in the ditch because I'm running my life. And as soon as I let go of that steering wheel and crawl back in that passenger seat, we slow down to 55 miles an hour. The car is right between the white lines and we get down the road when we're supposed to. Because if I'd gotten to Dallas, Texas when I want to hang out with Stu and play golf and eat barbecue and then get to the conference, I would have never met Yvonne. She was there for a reason that she should have never been there because God had a plan in her life. So if I just stay out of the way, work these steps, listen to my sponsor, be of service, I have a great life. And for every one of you sitting out here tonight, I thank you for the life I have.